October 2nd, 1918. Deep in France's Argonne Forest, Major Charles Whittlesey realized the horrifying truth. They were surrounded, cut off, alone. For 5 days, 550 American soldiers endured an unimaginable nightmare. Trapped in a ravine, they faced relentless German attacks. They ran out of food, water, and medical supplies. Then their own artillery began shelling their position. This is the story of the Lost Battalion, where a carrier pigeon became a hero, friendly fire became the deadliest enemy, and stubborn refusal to surrender became legendary. It's autumn 1918. After 4 years of war, the Allies are finally winning. The Americans are participating in the massive Meuse-Argonne Offensive, the largest operation in American military history. At the center of our story is Major Charles Whittlesey. Before the war, he was a Wall Street lawyer. Tall, thin, intellectual with wire-rimmed glasses. He looked like a professor, not a fighter. But he was a natural leader. His unit, the 308th Infantry Regiment, was part of the 77th Metropolitan Division. Immigrants and working-class men from New York City. Italians, Jews, Poles, Greeks, Irish, America's melting pot in uniform. On October 2nd, Whittlesey received orders: advance into the Argonne Forest. The French would advance on his left, Americans would support his right. A coordinated assault, but everything went wrong. The Argonne was a nightmare, dense, dark, tangled with undergrowth. The Germans had fortified it brilliantly with machine gun nests and barbed wire. Whittlesey pushed forward aggressively, following orders, but the units on his flank stopped. The French encountered resistance. The Americans got bogged down. Whittlesey kept going. By afternoon, he and 550 men had reached their objective, a hillside ravine. They'd done exactly what they were ordered to do, but when they looked back, they realized they were alone, completely alone. And the Germans were moving to surround them. The Lost Battalion wasn't lost. Headquarters knew where they were, but they were cut off, encircled, trapped behind enemy lines. Picture a ravine the size of a football field, surrounded by dense forest. 550 men, thousands of German soldiers closing in. Whittlesey ordered his men to dig in. They had rations for maybe 2 days, some ammunition, and crucially, no water source. German attacks began immediately. For 5 days and nights, they endured wave after wave of assaults. Machine gun fire from the trees, grenades flying into the ravine, snipers picking off anyone who moved. The Americans were surrounded on 3 sides. The narrow gap behind them was covered by German machine guns. Anyone who tried to escape was cut down. As hours turned to days, conditions became hellish. Food ran out by the 2nd day. But worse was thirst. There was a stream at the bottom of the ravine, completely exposed to German fire. Men who tried to fetch water were shot. Soldiers sucked moisture from leaves. Some drank their own urine. The wounded were everywhere. Medics ran out of bandages and morphine. Men lay in agony, their cries echoing through the ravine. The smell of gangrene filled the air. On October 4th, Germans called out in English, "You're surrounded. Give up and you'll be treated well." Whittlesey's response was silence. No surrender. Then came the most devastating blow. On October 4th afternoon, American artillery, their own artillery, began shelling their position. Shells exploded in the trees, sending deadly shrapnel down. Men who survived German bullets were torn apart by American artillery. The wounded screamed. Survivors huddled in foxholes and prayed. Whittlesey desperately needed to stop the friendly fire. But how? This is where one of the most famous heroes of World War I enters our story. And this hero wasn't human. It was a pigeon. The Lost Battalion had brought carrier pigeons with them, and by October 4th they were down to their last bird. A small checkered pigeon named Cher Ami, which is French for dear friend. Carrier pigeons were vital technology in WWI. Radio communication was unreliable, telephone lines got cut, and runners were often killed trying to cross battlefields. But pigeons had an incredible homing instinct. You could release them anywhere, and they'd fly back to their loft, carrying a tiny message capsule on their leg. Whittlesey personally wrote the message and attached it to Cher Ami's leg. We are along the road parallel to 276.4. Our own artillery is dropping a barrage directly on us. For heaven's sake, stop it." Then he released the bird. But Cher Ami didn't fly. The pigeon was terrified by the explosions and chaos. It landed in a nearby tree. The men watched in agony as their last hope sat there, refusing to fly. Soldiers started shouting, throwing stones, doing anything to get the bird to move. Finally, after several agonizing minutes, Cher Ami took flight. Immediately, German soldiers saw the bird and opened fire. They knew what it meant. The Americans were trying to communicate. Machine guns rattled, rifles cracked, and then, horrifyingly, the pigeon faltered in mid-air. Cher Ami had been hit. The men watched their last hope spiral downward, but somehow, impossibly, the bird recovered. Despite being shot through the breast, blinded in one eye, with one leg hanging by a tendon, Cher Ami flew on. 25 miles. That's how far Cher Ami flew, gravely wounded, to reach the American pigeon loft. The bird arrived covered in blood, barely alive, with Whittlesey's desperate message still attached to its shattered leg. The message got through. The artillery barrage stopped. Cher Ami survived, was treated by medics, and became one of the most decorated animals in military history. The pigeon was awarded the French Croix de Guerre for heroic service. When Cher Ami died a year later from his wounds, the bird's body was preserved and is now displayed at the Smithsonian. But back in the Argonne Forest, the nightmare continued. By October 7th, the Lost Battalion had been trapped for 5 days. Of the roughly 550 men who had advanced into the forest, nearly 200 were dead or wounded. The survivors were beyond exhausted, hollow-eyed, delirious from hunger and thirst, many suffering from shell shock. They had held their position through everything the Germans could throw at them. They had refused to surrender despite impossible odds. But they couldn't hold out much longer. Finally, American forces launched a massive assault to break through to Whittlesey's position. The 77th Division attacked from one direction, while the 82nd Division struck from another. It was brutal, bloody fighting through the same terrible terrain that had trapped the Lost Battalion in the first place. On the afternoon of October 7th, advance scouts from the American Relief Force finally reached the ravine. When they arrived, they found a scene of utter devastation. The dead lay everywhere. The wounded were in desperate condition. The survivors looked like ghosts, filthy, skeletal, traumatized beyond measure. Of the approximately 550 men who had been surrounded, only 194 walked out unscathed. The rest were dead, wounded, or missing. Major Whittlesey himself was physically uninjured, but emotionally shattered. He had watched nearly 2/3 of his command die or be wounded. He had been forced to make impossible decisions every moment of those 5 days. That burden would haunt him for the rest of his life. But they had held. Against all odds, the Lost Battalion had refused to break. The story of the Lost Battalion became instant legend. Newspapers across America trumpeted their heroism. Major Whittlesey was awarded the Medal of Honor. He became a national celebrity, paraded through the streets of New York City. But the fame tormented him. Whittlesey struggled with survivor's guilt and what we now recognize as severe PTSD. He couldn't escape the memories of those men dying in the ravine, couldn't stop second-guessing his decisions. In 1921, just 3 years after the battle, Charles Whittlesey boarded a ship bound for Havana. During the voyage, he disappeared. His body was never found. Most historians believe he committed suicide by jumping overboard. It's a heartbreaking end to a story of incredible courage. The man who saved nearly 200 soldiers through sheer determination couldn't save himself from the psychological wounds of war. The Lost Battalion's stand had strategic importance. Their advance and their refusal to retreat tied up German forces and contributed to the broader success of the Meuse-Argonne Offensive. But the human cost was staggering. Today there's a memorial in the Argonne Forest marking the site where these men made their desperate stand. And Cher Ami, that brave little pigeon, still stands in a display case at the Smithsonian. A reminder that heroism comes in unexpected forms. The Lost Battalion reminds us that war's greatest tragedies often happen to those who do everything right. who follow orders, who refuse to give up, who show extraordinary courage in impossible circumstances. These men weren't lost. They knew exactly where they were, they just couldn't get out. And they refused to surrender.